I bought these 3 broken Nintendo Game Boy Color Pokemon editions. All 3 of these are broken, so let's take a look at them and then see if we can fix them. This video is sponsored by iFixit, more on them in a minute. Now this Game Boy Color doesn't power on, so let's start with this one to see if we can fix it, and then we'll move on to these 2. We've got fresh batteries, the game is in. Let's just double check and see if it'll turn on. Just nothing at all. And this one, the reason this one's kind of weird is there's no corrosion in the battery compartment like at all. It is super clean. So let's get it apart and see the condition of the inside. I'm gonna be using my iFixit Protect toolkit. I love the bit set in this because it's got this driver, which has a nice smooth feel, but it's also got tons of different bits. And I know with these Game Boy Colors, I'm gonna need a Y1 bit. So I'm gonna grab that out of here. I know this is gonna have it because it's got almost any bit for taking apart almost any device. So we've got these 6 screws on the back. The iFixit Protect toolkit, the top cover over the bit set, you can also use as a screw tray. It's really handy because they got these lines in here that keep things separated. So for all these first screws I'm going to take out, I'm just going to put those in that first square there, and then they're just kind of stay organized. I don't remember if any of these screws are a different length, but if they are, then I can just move them over to the next square over, whoops, to the next square over, and that will make sure that I don't get them mixed up. And it looks like these are all the same size. I've only fixed like, I don't know, 1 or 2 Game Boy Colors in my whole life, so this is actually kind of new for me. The back, okay, the back just comes off. That's easy enough so far. And so far, oh, what do we have right here? Look at that. So we've got what looks like a little inductor. Where does that go though? Oh, right down here. Okay, so that's definitely a problem. So this must have went through a drop or something to cause that thing to just break off right there. Looking at it, it looks like everything else I see is in good condition. So let's get this board off and have a look at this under here. I'm not even sure what that is down there. Okay, looks like we got 3 screws here, so let's get those off and have a look underneath this board. The inside of this one is really clean. This looks really good. So this is gonna be a nice Game Boy Color once we get this thing all fixed up. Okay, now we need to flip it over. We have this little board right here. And honestly, I'm not even sure what this board does, but it looks like we've got 3 solder holes here and 4 over here, and then that just lifts up, it looks like. So we'll need to remove this in order to replace that, what looks to me like to be an inductor. The gel that you see me putting on the joints is called flux, and that is there to just help the solder flow. So in order to remove this little piece of the board, I'm going to be using what's called a solder sucker, and that is basically just a little vacuum gun that will vacuum up the solder when I put heat to the solder and melt it with my soldering iron. The goal in doing this is to remove the solder from the joint so I can pull each of those pins through the board and remove that little piece of board on the other side. And then once I'm done with the solder sucker, I'm going to come in with some solder wick. This is basically just tiny braided copper wire that will wick up the solder that's left on the joint and hopefully make it so these pins will just pull right out of the board. Okay, and now with that done, let's see if we can get this small board off of the main board. Okay, it looks like we're going to need to heat these pins a little bit, and hopefully that'll allow it to just drop right out. So I'm going to put a little bit of pressure with my pry tool while I heat these joints, and that should allow this to lift out. So you've seen me using iFixit tools, and I've already talked about the iFixit Protect toolkit that I love for working on devices like this. But this month, iFixit is having some great sales on parts, and they offer parts for all sorts of electronic devices. Now, they don't offer parts for Game Boy Colors as they're a little too old, but they offer parts for all sorts of things from iPhones to PlayStations to Xboxes and lots of stuff in between. So check them out over at ifixit.com/TronicsFix. Okay, now just give it a basic cleaning just to clean this up and make it look a little better. There we go. Same thing on this side. Okay, now I'm gonna come in with the solder sucker again, heat up these holes, and then try and pull all of the solder out of the holes. Then I can install the new board down into those holes. Okay, now all those holes should be cleaned out enough. This should be able to basically just go right in there. Let's go ahead and install this correctly. Put it in from this side. These 4 pins go in over here. These 3 pins here. It feels like we've got one of these. Oh, no, they're just not quite lined up right. So I just need to bend one of these pins over a little bit. Looks like this back leg here needs to be bent. And there we go. And with all that soldering done, just need to clean the flux off. I had to stop and go get some more IPA from my bottle, so the flux is not quite as cleanable as it usually is, so I might need to go ahead and heat this up with my iron again, and then that'll heat the flux up and make it much easier to remove. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now it's time to get it back installed and see if that fixed it. Can't forget the power button. That's definitely something I would do. Now these 3 screws go in. The screen ribbon cable. Locking tabs. And now we can put the top plastic on. Now let's get these batteries in. And of course, Lucky Luke. Can't forget Lucky Luke. Here we go. What's gonna happen? Come on, start up. Power, good. Do we get any noise? Oh, the speaker sounds horrible. That's a problem. So we need to replace the speaker too. I'm gonna get it back apart. We can do that real quick. Let's get that done. And then I think maybe this one's gonna be good to go. I've got the board removed. Here's the speaker. The speaker has 2 wires that go all the way through the board and are soldered to the other side. So I'm going to gently pull on 1 wire at a time and heat up the solder at the same time, and that will enable me to pull the wire right out. And now with the new speaker on, let's get it put back in again and see if this speaker sounds better. And I've got it back together just enough to test. I still need to put the screws in, batteries in, games in. Let's see what happens. Come on. Oh, that sounds great. That's what I'm talking about. There we go. So we have Game Boy Color number 1 all fixed. Let's move on to number 2 and see if we can fix that one. And Game Boy Color number 2 I bought for $75 on eBay. It has no sound, B button not working, and game image sometimes distorts. Not sure what that's all about. This one's in pretty good condition. It's got some bite marks up here and on the screen, which not my favorite, but it is what it is. Let's put some batteries in. Oh, we got some major battery corrosion going on there. That could be the source of the distortion of the game. Let's see if this thing even turns on. I've got my doubts. Okay, it does turn on. Oh yeah, there we go. It's hard to catch on camera, but the screen is definitely distorted. Let's see what happens with the game in it. There we go. Yep, definitely got distortion there. I feel like that might be just because of the corrosion in the battery compartment, but I don't know for sure. Either way, it's time to take number 2 apart and see if we can fix it. And with all the screws loose for number 2, let's have a look and see how badly the corrosion is from the battery leakage. Okay, oops, that fell out. I need to take the power button out because we will have to take this board out. So we've got some corrosion over here that I can see down by this capacitor. Same over here, some down here, some over here. The rest of it actually looks pretty good, so let's get the board out and see what it looks like on the other side. And the other side of the board doesn't look too bad. Speaker doesn't look great, and we definitely have a little bit of battery corrosion coming through these little holes right here from the other side over here. So there definitely is some issues there, but not too bad anyway. Oh, we also got some major issues on the game slot. So this is definitely a problem as well. We've got to get that cleaned up. I don't know if it's affected this side of the game slot, but for sure this side is pretty gross. So we got to get all that cleaned up. We need to see if these battery terminals are salvageable or if we need to replace them. Just judging by looking at it, I think we might be able to save them. So I'm going to do a bunch of scraping, see if I can get these things clean. I'm going to scrape it off with the pick and then come in with probably some IPA, maybe a little bit of BW100, and see if we can get these things all the way clean. And then also we need to replace this set of battery terminals that is inside the case as well. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. Just need to clean off the inside over here, and we do need to replace this battery, so we'll get that done. And I think we'll be ready to retest it and see if we made any progress. Now before we get this battery desoldered, the next thing I want to look at is this B button right here. The A button and the B button both have a little bit of the gold contact worn off, and running my pick over it, it's a little bit rough there. So I'm gonna try and smooth that out a little bit without wearing more of the contact off. Let's get a Q-tip with some IPA. Just scrub on this a little bit. Make sure it gets nice and clean. Doesn't really look better probably on camera, but I think it actually is getting quite a bit cleaner and it is a lot smoother. So hopefully that's the only issue there. If this doesn't fix it, there could be an issue with some of these traces down in here because all these little holes were filled with corrosion. So we may need to do some repairs there, but I want to get this speaker replaced and then get this thing back together and then just see if it works after we've cleaned all of this corrosion off. And now with that speaker soldered on, we can get these battery contacts replaced. So we just need to get our pick down in here or something to pry on this tab as we push down, and then the battery contacts will just drop out. Just like that. These ones might be salvageable. These springs are really hard to reshape, so I'm just gonna replace this one. But first, we need to get this shell all cleaned up. I'm gonna come through with my dental pick and just get all the really stuck on stuff. And after that, we can use a toothbrush or Q-tip and some IPA or BW100 to clean the rest off. And with that all nice and clean, we can get the new battery contacts in, get the batteries in, the shell on, then we can test this one and see if it's gonna work. And new battery contacts in. There we go. Batteries in, game in, and let's see what happens. Come on! Oh, still the exact same issues on the screen. That's a bummer. Okay, that means we probably have some corrosion damage on the board. Now it's time to find it. Now looking more at this board, I think one thing we're gonna need to do is remove this game card reader because it was so corroded over here and I'm worried some of the corrosion is probably going on underneath this reader, but there's no way for me to see it unless we remove it. I've never removed one of these before, So the main thing I have to be careful of is not to get any heat on the speaker and to keep the heat just right on here. And hopefully I won't melt any plastic. There's some plastic over here and there's a bunch of stuff on this side that I don't want to get too hot. So I'm going to try and keep the heat just focused right on these pins, and then hopefully we can just slip this right off. And here we have it. That actually came off pretty easily. I'm really glad we took this off because there's just a bunch of corrosion and grime down in here. We have all of these holes cleaned out so it's ready to be reinstalled. But first we need to go through and clean this all up, and then we need to also go through and recheck all these little holes on the board and make sure there is no corrosion issues here. We might have to rebuild some of these traces if the corrosion has eaten away too much of the copper. Now, one of the things I need to do to this connector as well, or this game slot, is dip it in or soak it in some vinegar. And that will get in all these little cracks too. So I'm just kind of scraping off the big stuff, and then I'll actually do that off camera probably. I don't happen to have any right at this minute. But even just what we're doing is getting a lot of it off. Let's go ahead and get some isopropyl alcohol on here. It's really good we took this thing off because those are just so corroded, those pins in here. That's already looking way better, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Now, taking a look at the board, all of these little traces right here, they all do have continuity, so I don't see any of these that are causing a major problem. Now, it is possible. There's a lot of corrosion in all these little holes. So if one of these has an area where the corrosion has eaten through the copper trace completely, then that can definitely be causing a problem. But I haven't found any of those. I've looked at each one, and I just don't see any of them that look like they're causing that. That being said, they definitely still could be. So I actually did find some vinegar to soak this with, but I didn't film it because it's not the kind of vinegar that a lot of people would use for this necessarily. So in order to just avoid all the comments about using the wrong kind of vinegar, I just didn't film it. This, once it dries, it's going to be ready to go. So I've cleaned out all these holes, so this is ready to reinstall back onto the board, and then we'll solder all the pins on, and then we'll just give it a test and see if that was enough to fix it. So now we just need to line these pins up, just like that. Push this out a bit so it can clip on there. There we go. And now I'm going to put a bunch of flux on each of these pins, then come in with my iron and solder each of these pins to the board. So a lot of flux you'll see that's more of a liquid. What I use is called a paste flux. I prefer the paste flux because it doesn't melt off as fast, so it gives me a little more chance to work on it before it melts off and disappears. And I don't necessarily mean to brag, but that looks pretty good. Now let's get this installed back into the Game Boy case and see if it works. And ribbon cable for the LCD goes in. We'll lock it down. Speaker goes in. Now these screws can go on. Then the back cover goes on. Then we can test it out. Okay, let's turn it on and see if it's fixed. Oh, it is not. Still have no display. That's a bummer. And after looking at this board more and testing it, I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to call this one not fixable. There's just too much corrosion in all these little vias down in here. Vias are basically just holes, usually all the way through the board. And with all this corrosion, it just means that some of these traces are all worn away. So I would have to test and figure out which ones are worn away, repair those, but also with the corrosion going down in between layers, some of that corrosion is probably going to eat away some of these traces in the future, so it's just going to be better to call this board non-fixable. The good news is that it does have a lot of good parts that I can use to repair other Game Boy Colors. So we'll put number 2 aside, let's see if we can fix number 3. Number 3 actually has some pretty similar problems as number 2, so hopefully this one isn't as bad as number 2. Let's open it up and see what we got. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, let's not do number 3 quite yet. For number 2, I actually do have a motherboard that I can use for this. I just remembered this. So this board I just have laying around. I just need to hook up a speaker for this one, and then we can use this board in this Game Boy Color and still fix it. And this will be the first part I steal off of this non-fixable Game Boy Color board. You've already seen me replace speakers, so I'm just gonna do this part off camera. Then we'll get this board installed and just double check and make sure everything works. And screws are in, batteries are in. Let's see if Lucky Luke is gonna bring us some luck. Okay, here we go. Good so far. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Speaker sounds good. Okay. And Game Boy Color number 2 is all fixed. Let's open up number 3 and see if we can figure out what's wrong. And with batteries installed, this just doesn't come on at all. No power. Oh, got a little bit of power. Okay. So maybe these battery contacts look really good. I don't see any, oh, we do have some corrosion over here. So right over here we've got some, so, all right, so let's get this apart, see how bad that corrosion is, and see if we can fix it. Hopefully it's not as bad as the last one. That one was pretty bad. Okay, and this thing's kind of stuck on there, but no major issues other than that corrosion on that one battery terminal. That is great news. I have high hopes for this one. I'd really love to see this one working. This is just so clean. Now let's look at the other side of the board. And that looks so clean. I'm gonna clean off these button pads real quick. Oh, also we got some major issues with these buttons. That's actually pretty gross looking. So these definitely need to be replaced. So I'm just gonna take the buttons from the Game Boy Color with the bad board and install them into this one. That problem's fixed. Now we'll just give these a little bit of a cleaning. Nothing too crazy, just some IPA on a Q-tip. Let it dry, and then we'll be able to get this battery contact clean. And hopefully that's all we need to do to this one. So I'm gonna use a vinegar-soaked Q-tip. Just soak that really good. That's gonna help eat away at that battery acid on there. Then we'll be able to clean it up after that's done its job. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but as I kind of chip away at this battery acid, you can see it kind of foaming. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but it's kind of foaming, and that's the vinegar doing its job. The vinegar will also help neutralize any of this battery corrosion that might be still on here, so then it doesn't cause more corrosion when I'm all done with the cleaning. So now I'm going to clean this off. Yep, that's looking really good. Not perfect, but definitely better, and this will go on to last a very long time. I don't see any trace of battery acid or corrosion on there anymore. So now let's get this reinstalled into the case and see if that's all it took to fix it. So we got the case back on, the screws all in. I think I must have mislabeled this one because we have two labels that are very similar, and this just has none of the symptoms of the other one other than the battery corrosion. So let's see if Lucky Luke is gonna bring us some more luck. Here we go. Good so far. Do we have sound? Yes, we do. And it sounds great. Ah, Lucky Luke died. So even though we did have to replace one board on one of these Game Boy Colors, we are able to fix all three of them. Thanks again to iFixit for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching it, and I hope you have a good one.